Hi class. Sorry for the delay. I'm not very good at technology. I've been trying to upload this video for a couple days now. It was really weird on my phone. I couldn't get it connected through YouTube that way, but I think I figured out a way to successfully upload my project. So we're gonna give this a shot. My name is Allison Wilson, and I'm doing my presentation on Anama and Padakasemupata. Okay, so just a brief talk about what Buddhism is before I get into depth about Anaman and Padakasemupata. That way, there's just more understanding in what I say. So Buddhism is the path of practice and spiritual development leading to insight into the true nature of reality. Buddhists practice meditation for means of changing themselves in order to develop the qualities of awareness, kindness, and wisdom. The experience developed within the Buddhist tradition over thousands of years has created an incomparable resource for all those who wish to follow a path which ultimately accumulates the enlightenment or Buddhahood. An enlightened being sees the nature of reality absolutely clearly, just as it is, and lives fully and naturally in accordance with that vision. This is the goal of the Buddhist spiritual life, representing the end of suffering for anyone who attains it. So, Anaman and Padakasemupata have to deal with the not self and the dependent origination. So Anaman is the doctrine that there is Anaman is the doctrine that there is in humans no permanent underlying substance that can be called the soul. Instead, the individual is compounded of 5 factors, which I'm going to talk about in another slide. And but those 5 factors, they're always changing, just like the universe, just like Anaman. And then just like Padakasemupata. And then Padakasemupata is the chain or law of dependent origination, or the chain of causation, which is basically a fundamental concept of Buddhism describing the causes of suffering, or dukkha, and a course of events that leads to being through rebirth. And so they have some differences, but have a lot of similarities. So I'm going to talk about those. Okay. So Atman is the Hindu idea of a soul, and Anatman rejects the idea of Atman or the self, because the 5 things that constitute self cannot exclusively describe a person. And the 5 things they say constitute a self are the body, the consciousness, the karmic activities, feelings, and perceptions. It takes all of these parts, also known as Brahman, to make the self. Therefore, there is no singular self or soul, but the body and the corpus of other qualities of a person exist. The idea of anicca, or impermanence, is important because this erratic property of life proves that there is no permanent self. The self is not one thing that simply just exists like the universe. It is constantly changing. The interdependence or dependent origination of all things further proves that the self is non-existent. If any other factors in the universe change, the self changes. That's because the self is not independent or stable, and it is complicated by many factors that constitute a person. While Anaman rejects the self, the evaluation of the self relies on the existence of the self. Okay, so just some history, kind of fun facts about Anatman. It comes from the Buddhist text called the Sumyata Kaya. It's a critique of the Hindu idea of Atman, but it's slightly different. It is mostly present in Mahayan and Theravadan beliefs. In Mahayan Buddhism, because of Narayana, the focus is more on the cycle described in the previous slide. They believe that reversing this cycle is the only way to reach dukkha, or the end of suffering. And for Theravada Buddhism, it's mostly only present in monks. Lay Buddhists would have an issue reaching an Atman due to the restrictions of their everyday lifestyles, though. In the Theravada tradition, an Atman is a way to reach nirvana. Okay, so the true self, an early idea of an Atman. Okay, this is a tough one to say, so just bear with me. The Tathagata Garbha Sutras discuss an idea of a true self, and the Tathagata is an innate part of a person or a Buddha self, as an Atman. I find this really interesting because it seems to contradict the claims by the theories of an Atman that the self cannot exist due to constantly changing, interconnected nature of the world. So how can an innate self exist that is an Atman without following the principles of an Atman? That's just something to think about. And then, okay, so Padaka Samuppada, there's really like a basic-ish cycle that I tried to break it down into. On figure 1, you start with the rebirth consciousness, and then you have the mind and body, the 6 spheres of senses, then there's contacts, the feeling, craving, and grasping, and then kama or karma, and suffering, which will lead you back to rebirth of consciousness. Padaka Samuppada is an explanation of the cycle of birth and rebirth, the ultimate interconnectedness of the world. Rebirth consciousness leads to the senses, and the senses allow the body and animal mind to experience craving. Craving leads to actions that affect your karma, and your karma leads to the condition of your rebirth. So the cycle is the cause of suffering. So the self, the body, and the mind must be rejected in order to reach the end of suffering. By ceasing consciousness, one ceases mind and matter. This ceases the senses, which ends contact, feeling, craving, grasping, and eventually karma. Padaka Samuppada also deals with the animal mind versus the human mind. The animal mind focuses on animalistic desires and needs such as sex and violence. The animal mind is an inherent part of the body. The animal mind and the actions of the animal mind lead to suffering. And then the human mind is developed via rejecting human desires and the cessation of animalistic activities. The human mind also leads to suffering. The self is part of the human mind, and therefore it must be rejected. It is developed via reversing the cycle exhibited in figure 1. This ceases suffering and allows the possibility that the original detrimental cycle will end. OMG. Okay, sorry. Okay. How consciousness comes to being in the first place. It must be addressed that the reason that the cycle previously mentioned repeats itself due to karma from past lives. The building of consciousness begins in the womb. It is the development of the 5 groups of existence. And those 5 groups are the corporality group, the feeling group, the perception group, the mental formation group, and the consciousness group. These groups of existence are part of the animal and human mind that lend to the process towards karma. So craving and clinging. Where am I